Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and gittens, and comic book fans the world over, welcome to another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, now with 10% more Ignatowski. This is where you come to ask me, a world famous, world renowned, world celebrated comic book writer, questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is, obviously, write comic books. Let's get right to your first question. Bo Barton. I very much enjoyed reading Hunter Ninja Bear, and I remember you mentioning that a follow-up was in the works. I feel like it's been a while since I've heard any news regarding Phenom Comics and their potential releases. Do you have any updates on the status of Hunter Ninja Bear Volume 2, Seven Deadly Sinners, and any other future Phenom Comics projects? Are these titles still planned for release? Hunter Ninja Bear, if you're not aware of it, is a massive 300 page plus or 300 plus page epic set in the early 1800s about a ninja clan threatened by carnivorous, ferocious, feral bears back in Japan. And they feel that the solution to this problem is to recruit some mountain men from the Western United States. And it's action and craziness and mysticism, and all wildly illustrated by Mel Ruby and Rob Hunter. And if you haven't seen it, you need to check it out. I am currently writing Hunter Ninja Bear 2. I've written 2 scripts for 2 issues so far. I don't think the art has begun on it. So, but it is in production. It will show up. Now, as for Seven Deadly Sinners, the 1970s biker flick on paper created by me and Bob C. Harden, we were going to go through Phenom, and I, I'm in agreement with them. They felt, due to the subject matter of this book, it wasn't a good fit for them. It wasn't the kind of look that they were going for as a company. It didn't fit their brand. And I'm like, hey, that's cool. I understand all of that, right? They were very, very sorry. And we mutually agreed that we should find another home. And Seven Deadly Sinners, has found another home. I don't want to make any premature announcements, but it will be released as a crowdfunder from a major publisher shortly. And it is, it has been for a couple of years complete. It's complete, ready to go to the printers. It's just a matter of getting the crowdfunding campaign together and agreeing on format and things like that. But both projects are on the way. Josh Standley. When a company leases an IP and creates new stories and characters, can the owner then use those new parts at will? How does that work? In other words, is the licensee or licensor, do they own that material, even though it's produced by Dark Horse or Marvel or Archie? Yes. In almost every case I've ever heard of, the original license holder, who owns the IP, owns any comic book material produced by the companies in question. So Marvel cannot, well, I guess they can now, but back in the day could not at will just simply reprint Star Wars comics whenever they felt like it, because they did not own the rights. They did not own the rights to the comics they had created. They were in effect work for hire for Lucasfilm. And same with Sonic and Aliens and Terminator and any other licensor you can think of, which is why you see, things like Conan, Titan Comics reprinting what were once Marvel Comics as Titan editions. It's because that work belongs to the licensors of Robert E. Howard's works. So the licensor can place those comic books with any publisher they wish. So that's how that works. One of the most unusual cases was Matt Groening and Steven Hillenburg, creators of Simpsons and SpongeBob, they retained the comic book rights. When they signed their contracts with alternatively Fox and Nickelodeon, they retained comic book rights because, you know, they're probably seen as not worth that much. And so they were able to publish their own comic books. Great, but both of them eventually forming their own companies to distribute these comics. And sadly, they're not in publication anymore. But was an unusual that the creator of an IP was able to keep on going and create an awful lot of comic book material that they in turn owned. That was never published by an independent publisher. It was published by the creators themselves. Okay. Hey, have you subscribed? Subscribe. I don't even care about subscriptions anymore. YouTube's playing a real numbers game. If you've subscribed in the past and check, your subscription is probably not valid anymore. But if you want to subscribe, or you can go over to Subscribestar, Chuck Dixon, and you won't get kicked off of that subscription list because I control it. I'll put a link down below. Joshua Ignatowski, what a surprise. Do you have any thoughts on how the Spider-Man 2 film succeeded where so many other Hollywood sequel films have failed story-wise? Well, they did the simple thing that you need to do with a sequel is don't remake the first movie. The tendency in making sequels is, well, they liked it, they liked the first one, so let's not change anything and just do the same thing over again. Just sort of move the sets around and throw in a few extra actors. What they did was, for what you need for the success of sequel is stop thinking about the character and come up with a story, a really good story, and put the character in it. Now, of course, in a sequel, you're going to explore the character a bit more and everything else, but we pretty much knew everything we needed to know about Peter Parker. So they bring in what you always bring in a comic book sequel. You bring in a new villain, which, what are subsequent comic book issues in a series but sequels to the first issue? No problem. Superhero movie, bring in a new villain. They bring in Alfred Molina to play Dr. Octopus, and it's magic. It's fantastic. He is so great in this, and it's a cogent threat, and most importantly, they follow the source material. For Spider-Man 2, the success was following the source material. There was something about Spider-Man that captured the imaginations of comic book readers in its day. Now, to make a movie successful, you need magnitudes more people than were reading Spider-Man comics in the 60s and 70s. But there's a reason why, it's logical to think, or it follows to think that if people were so crazy, comic book readers are so crazy about Spider-Man for all those years, there must be something there. And that something, whatever it was Spider-Man had, might be appreciated by a larger audience if the larger audience was ever exposed to it. And so, wisely, in the early days, the people doing these superhero movies made sure they stayed close to the source material because, okay, this is whatever the it factor is here, we want to preserve that and bring it to a larger audience. And we see the results at the box office. Once a larger audience was exposed to what you and I always knew was, pure comic book magic, once they were exposed to that, they responded. And they went to see these movies, and they went to see them again. I've said before, my mother-in-law, who was in her 80s at the time, her and all her friends from her senior citizen complex went to see the Spider-Man movies, and they loved them. And were these movies aimed at their age group? No. Had they read Spider-Man? No, they didn't read Spider-Man as a kid. They were adults by the time Spider-Man came along. But they responded to the material. And that's what a successful sequel needs. It needs a new, brand new, good, solid story that brings out all the best of the character, all the coolest things. And, for a superhero movie, a good villain, obviously. And most importantly, for a superhero movie, follow the damn source material. You can measure the failure of the DC movies and the Marvel movies. The decline in box office for them begin with them moving away from the source material and creating new material because they think they know better. And as this new material is introduced, the audience rejects it because the magic is gone. What was the lightning in the bottle from the comic books has been dispelled, and now they're floundering. They don't know what to do next. Obviously, the thing to do next is return to the source material, but it's almost too late for that. They've driven the bus so far off of the route they don't know how to get back on the main highway. So anyway, as far as sequels go, again, you've got to have a good story. You've got to further explore the characters, reveal things about the characters, and then move the story along. In an epic saga like Godfather, you've got this big story to tell. And Godfather 2 moves the story along, but at the same time, unusual for a movie, they tell us another story, which basically is a prequel. It's a prequel within a sequel of young Vito Corleone in Sicily and how he comes to America and why he comes to America. And we learn a lot about both the father, Vito, and the son, Michael, as the film progresses. Road Warrior as well. We learn more about Max. And the thing about Road Warrior is it's a perfect example of what I'm saying, where you come up with a great story and you stick your character in it. Road Warrior could have been any character. They could have created a new character for Road Warrior. The story is strong enough, it still would have been a hit. It didn't have to be Mad Max. But because it is Mad Max, it's even cooler because we've already seen this previous movie and we know what a badass he is, and we know what makes him tick, and we know what drives him, and we know that he's a burnout, he's a wasteoid, and here we create this great suspense action scenario, this gasoline refinery under siege by savages, and we introduce Mad Max into this chaos, into this situation, to try to bring order out of it, and also look after himself. So, I mean, perfect example of write a great story and stick your character in it, rather than thinking about, how do I use the character again, or they just want to see more of this guy. No, they want to see more of this guy in a great story. We still want a story. Empire Strikes Back, same thing. You're exploring the characters, their relationships, and everything else in a great story. This is action packed, briskly paced, smartly written, and it gives us it meets our expectations. It meets the expectations that Star Wars created, which was a tall order, and then exceeds them. And that's another function of a sequel, is it has to exceed our expectations. It has to be more than, okay, I guess I'll go see this movie if it's like the other movie. No, it's I went to see this movie and it was like the other movie, but it was even better. So that's what you want. To win, spin. Ignatowski never gets tired of winning here. Okay, Blackbeard or Captain Kidd? Choose my favorite pirate. William Kidd, or Captain Kidd, was not really a pirate. He was a privateer. He was financed by a consortium of banks in New York. and they bought him a ship and they hired him a crew. And his job was to sail around the tip of Africa up into the Indian Ocean, into an area they called the Pirate Round. And it was a ripe hunting ground for pirates back in the day, because the Mughals, the Muslim Mughals who ruled India, would go to the Hajj in Mecca each year, and they would sail there from India to Yemen. and, and then from there head on to Mecca. And they would bring along with them, their wives and their treasure, and because they didn't trust anybody to look after their treasure, so they just sort of took it all with them. They did not pack light. They had these huge, ungainly galleons they would use, and they were really easy pickings for pirates. And William Kidd's job was to go around the Horn, um, and raid on the pirate round and make lots and lots of money and loot for these banks. He was basically an investment instrument. But he was kind of a screw up because he got in trouble with the British Navy even before he reached the Cape of Africa. And he had them pursuing him for a while, and it really delayed his trip. And when he got into the Indian Ocean, he pretty much failed to um, meet meet what his employers expected of him. He failed at his job, and when he made such an embarrassment because the British government was really ticked at what these American banks were doing, that the American banks disowned him. And when he returned to New York, he was tried for piracy and hung. He was hung by the very men who, and condemned by the very men who had hired him to be a pirate. Blackbeard, or Edward Teach, on the other hand, was a hugely successful pirate. He had a fearsome reputation, but apparently wasn't, underneath it all, wasn't that bad a guy. he was, he treated his prisoners with a degree of, honor. He would kidnap people, but he would always make good on the deal. He would return them for ransom. He would take prisoners and treat them fine and then release them. So he had this really fearsome, horrifying reputation, which would make, the ships he plundered surrender to him immediately. If you knew it was Blackbeard, you drew down your flag and surrendered, and let him loot the hell out of your ship. He kept an iron hand over his crew, but he was beloved by his crew because he was a winning pirate. And he wasn't a pirate who simply sailed one ship around. He had a fleet of pirate ships. He was pretty much a pirate admiral. And he had his own secure base of operations, I believe in Tortuga. And, enormously successful as a pirate, the Elon Musk of pirates, whereas William Kidd, not so successful. So I'm going to go with Blackbeard. And also, legend has it, and I don't think this is really true, but it's inspiring. Legend has it that if Blackbeard was taking a larger ship than his own, he would set fire to his own ship to inspire his crew to take the other ship, because they would not have a home to come back to because he had set fire to his own boat. But it turns out, upon research, that's apocryphal, but I still love that story. Triple spin. Ignatowski is back with, do you have a favorite Tim Allen film? That's rather specific, but I'm going to vote for the one that almost all of you are going to vote for, Galaxy Quest. It's a terrific Star Trek parody. It's also a terrific farcical comedy with an absolutely amazing cast. I mean, Tony Shalhoub, Jonathan Pryce, Sigourney Weaver, Sam Rockwell. I mean, it just doesn't get better than that. And it's oddly, it's beloved by people who've watched it, but it wasn't successful at the box office. I'm sure it's made its money over time in constant reruns on streaming and cable services. But and the role was perfect for Tim Allen. His comic persona as the sort of flawed masculine figure was just a great choice to send up, William Shatner, basically. And nothing against Shatner, but he really got in the groove on this one, and everything about it's great. If you've seen it, you already know what I'm talking about. But I'm gonna split. I got two favorite Tim Allen movies, and this one's less well known, and there's a really good reason for that. It's called Big Trouble, and it's based on a novel by Jay Conley, who for a while had this hot streak in Hollywood of having his novels turned into movies. He wrote the novel that Funny Farm, that Chevy Chase comedy was based on, and Quick Change, the Bill Murray heist comedy. Um, so Big Trouble is farce, big ensemble cast of comic actors that you know well from television and movies. And Tim Allen is sort of a hapless guy living in Miami, and he gets involved with without realizing it, gets involved with this terror plot. So, which is why you may never have heard of this movie, because this movie was due to be released the weekend after September 11th, 2001. So the studio wisely thought, hey, people probably wouldn't think this is real funny, a terror plot movie involving an airplane. They're not gonna think this is very funny, and they pulled it from release, and then released it, like a year and a half later. But the thing is, by that time, they weren't going to spend any more marketing money or anything else. So they just sort of dumped it into home video and cable. So you probably never heard of it, but it's got just about everybody in it. As far as humor, Stanley Tucci, it's just a funny movie if you ever get a chance to see it. It's good stuff. Brakefield Michael. Chuck, can you talk about the ruthlessness of industry toward creator rights? Also, I'd love to hear any Mark Grunwald or Jim Shooter stories you can share. I didn't have a lot of contact with Jim Shooter at Marvel because I was working for Larry Hama, which meant I was literally in the back corner at Marvel. Larry had an office at the end of the hallway, and it was sort of his own universe. And he was doing G.I. Joe, and he was doing Savage Tales and Savage sort of Conan, and he wasn't doing any superhero titles. And so Shooter literally had no interest in what Larry Hama was doing. Shooter was all about the MCU. And as long as Larry was successful, and obviously he was enormously successful, G.I. Joe being the number one best-selling comic at Marvel during Shooter's era, Savage Sword selling like gangbusters. I mean, just very, very successful. It just sort of left Larry alone to do what he did. Wisest decision Shooter could have made. Just leave Larry to his own devices. He's, he's doing good stuff. He's doing the Lord's work for Marvel Comics outside of the MCU. The only time I ever actually saw Shooter at Marvel, I was visiting, probably, hanging out with Larry for the afternoon. And I saw Shooter walking back and forth, waving pages of original art over his head through the bullpen. And there actually was a Marvel bullpen. It was a large open area in the middle of the floor, with dozens of people working in cubicles. And he was walking back and forth, waving this original artwork, shouting, "This is ugly! This is ugly!" He didn't like the artwork for that issue. And just basically saying this was unacceptable. This was, below the level of artwork that to be expected from a Marvel comic. And he was just basically letting everybody know about it. The only other thing about Shooter was I happened to be up there to go to lunch with Larry on the day after Shooter was fired. And I ended up going to this lunch where they filled the back room of this Mexican restaurant. And people were coming from all over. People that weren't working at Marvel at the time. John Byrne was there, Walt Simonson was there, and it was sort of a celebratory, a gathering of the people that didn't like Jim Shooter, that rankled under his reign, and they were coming back to have a celebratory lunch, which I thought was a little weird, but I'm kind of fly on the wall. So I got to see, there were editors, former Marvel editors that came down from DC or up from DC to attend this lunch. So, Mike Carlin was there. That's one that I remember. But, it was maybe, 25 people at this lunch, impromptu. celebration of Jim Shooter's departure. And I was there, but I had no opinion either way because I'd never worked with the guy. All I knew was he made Marvel a whole lot of money. He was successful, and I thought, well, isn't that all that matters? And that's all that should matter. Mark Grunwald, on the other hand, again, I'm outside of the Marvel mainstream. I'm outside of the Marvel clique. I'm not writing superheroes for the most part. I did 2 years on Moon Knight, and they couldn't wait to get me off it, to give it to someone who was in the clique. But Grunwald, you never hear a bad word about him. And people that I know very well, that I'm friends with in the business, who were friends with him, just say the guy was just a terrific guy. Again, like Shooter, like Hama, extremely successful at his line. I had no contact with him, and I've told this story before, except one time when I wrote it was part of a crossover, the Acts of Vengeance crossover. I wrote a Moon Knight story. And the idea of Acts of Vengeance was that villains that usually did not fight the hero in your book, in other words, your hero is going to fight villains he never fought before. And I put together a trio of villains that Moon Knight had never faced before, that he was basically not even qualified to fight, that they were way above his power levels and skill levels, and then he had to defeat them because he's the hero of the book. And I had one of the villains making fun of one of the other villains, and I got a call from Mark Grunwald, who he wasn't the editor on this, but he was the group editor and overseer of Acts of Vengeance, and he basically called and read me the riot act, that our characters did not malign each other, that it was, that the character that this villain was making fun of was a much beloved established character in the Marvel universe. And I tried to explain that it wasn't me making fun of this other character. I like this other character too. It was Paste Pot Pete, the Trapster. I said, but I'm trying to show how these villains, they're villains. They're bad guys. They don't necessarily get along. They're not alive because they love each other. There's no kinship. And one of them's always going to want to be Alpha Dog, and I think it was Killer Shrike was the one of the trio. He's the one making fun of the Trapster, and I said, so he's going to put this guy down so he can be Alpha Dog, so he can be dominant within the group. And Mark wasn't buying it, and he says, you're going to have to rewrite the dialogue, which I did. He was the boss. He was running things. This is how he did it, and that's the thing. All these editors would have rules. Shooter had a lot of rules, and people railed against him, and they didn't like him because of these rules. But he was making the rules, and consequently, whatever he was doing was selling a lot more comics. Marvel was profitable for the first time in a long time, and very profitable under his run. So whatever he was doing was working for Marvel, and the same with Grooney. I might argue or disagree with him, but I can't disagree with the success he had. He knew his readership. So there you go. Same thing with Larry. Larry knew what his readers wanted and gave it to them. Now, as far as, creator owned and how let's face it, DC and Marvel look down or look upon creators and creator rights, DC's better about it than Marvel. Traditionally, I don't know how they are now, but if you were in the clique in the 70s at DC, you got all kinds of sweetheart deals in perpetuity. In the 90s, when they introduced participation, they threw the doors open to anybody who created at DC to own a little piece of what they were creating, and they honor that for the most part. They stop paying international royalties, even though we were owed them. But that's a story for another day. But as far as creator rights, they both companies had lawyers. Now that they belong to multinational entertainment conglomerates, Warner's and Disney, they've got rooms full of lawyers. As I often say, they got lawyers hanging on hooks. They're just waiting to sick on you. They're just going to loose their chain and go after you because they're on retainer. They're paying them a salary, so they may as well have them making your life miserable. So and so I think both companies, at their heart, even more so than ever, particularly Disney, have no regard for creator rights. They will screw you out of whatever they owe you. They will lie and cheat and steal and prevaricate to keep as much of your money in their pockets for as long as they can. And of course the big stick here is they'll threaten your career. You know, if you sue Marvel or DC or something, or go to war with them in the courtroom, they ain't going to hire you. You know, and they may even do what they can to ruin your reputation. And a lot of that's why they can get away with this stuff, because the vast majority of creators are sitting waiting for the phone to ring. They're hoping they're going to get work at DC and Marvel. I know creators who have not worked at either company for a decade, who still hold out hope that they will reach out to them. And I always tell them, look, they forgot about you. They don't even know your name anymore. They're not going to reach out to you. So if you've got a beef with them, you may as well make it public. You may as well, do something about it. That's why I mentioned DC stopped paying international royalties. And I bring this up all the time in public. This is not the first time I've spoken about this. I bring it up in public. I bring it up on venues like this. I bring it up on social media. I brought it up on other people's YouTube channels and podcasts. And I've never once, one time, had one creator step forward and say, yeah, they stopped paying me international royalties too. And what are we going to do about it? I mean, if enough of us started complaining about this, they would have to start doing it again. And it's heartbreaking, and I'm not the only one in this boat, but my work is never out of print in Europe. I have things that just go back to print over and over again in Italy, Germany, Spain, France, and the numbers are higher than they would be in the United States. So if you're talking like 15 years of royalties that have not been paid, that's a whole lot of money. And I can see why Warner's would want to hold on to it, because when you figure every creator who's owned international royalties, we're talking into the tens of millions of dollars that have not been paid out, that are sitting somewhere. So anyway, yeah, I mean, you got to watch your back and count your silverware when you're dealing with the major publishers. And this is not so much the case in the indies, although there's a few indies you need to watch out for too. They've got some contracts that I think were written by Satan, so you got to watch out there too. There's certain things you want in a creator-owned contract. There's certain things you want to look for, and then there's certain alarm bells that need to go off if you see them in a clause on a contract. So there you go. Really nothing has changed. If anything, it's gotten worse at the major publishers. Creeper Weirdo, it's me again, and I got some more questions. I don't think I've ever asked you for your opinion on Calvin and Hobbes, so what do you think of it? Also, do you have any thoughts on Bill Watterson not cashing in on its popularity in the same way Charles Schultz did with Peanuts? Is it because it's meant to be a comic strip? Is a good enough answer. Yeah, I mean, I like Calvin and Hobbes. I mean, just like everybody else at the time when the strip was running, I followed it. I bought the paperback books. I bought the collections. When the complete Calvin and Hobbes hardcover slipcase came out, I bought it and reread them all. And I go back and look at them every now and again. And yeah, it's a classic, instant classic, wonderfully realized. Watterson, enormously talented, and obviously put his life into this strip. I always think he sort of left when he was on top because he's probably just exhausted. But yeah, I mean, I dig it, and and Watterson, he's a hardliner because they were lined up around the block, licensors wanting to make tchotchkes and bumper stickers and T-shirts, dolls, and all the rest of it. And he said no. He did not want. I mean, I specifically remember him saying he did not want an animated show made of Calvin and Hobbes because then the voices of those actors would be the voices of Calvin and Hobbes in the readers' heads. And he didn't want to replace those voices that the people already had in their heads. He didn't want his creation diluted or changed or modified in any way. And I respect that. But he really is just a super hardliner guy because I don't know if any of you remember, but at the height of his popularity, he very publicly went against other strips in the paper. He complained that there were the overall quality of comic strips in the newspaper was poor, and he particularly went against legacy comic strips like Snuffy Smith and Beetle Bailey, strips that had run for decades and decades and decades, and were well past their prime. They were tired and probably should have been canceled. But what he didn't take into consideration is that a lot of those traditional legacy strips they're just so traditional. People were used to seeing them in the newspaper. It was like an unchanging. Everything about the world could change, but you knew you could open your local newspaper and Nancy and Sluggo would be there. And yeah, they weren't as funny as they used to be, but they were there, and you were reading them mostly out of habit, or you were just looking at them and just comforted to know, that High and Lois were still at it in the newspaper. And the thing is that if you've ever read about many instances where they tried to cancel newspaper strips, like, okay, who the hell's reading this? Who's reading Winnie Winkle? Let's just cancel it. And the minute they cancel it, the letters come in, the phone calls come in from all the people that they didn't realize were reading this every day. We're buying a newspaper, to read Blondie. And I don't think Watterson took that into account, that newspapers are a business. And also, a lot of those legacy strips have, just, market forces. They don't have as many newspapers anymore. We don't see them as often. And there was room made for new, more innovative comic strips. And nothing really happened there. There was never another Calvin and Hobbes. Pearls Before Swine is not Calvin and Hobbes. So it's just a daily, I Hate Mondays kind of comic strip. Nobody rose up to replace. I can't think of any. Maybe Leo. Leo is a fun strip. And Fuzzy Tales for a while was a fun strip. I got a little weary of it though. It became repetitive. Anyway, I'm off. Anyway, to answer the right, to quote our president. Well, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. I'm not forgetting what I'm saying. I'm just sort of reining it in here. Now, Charles Schultz, on the other hand, as popular as Calvin and Hobbes was, it's nothing in comparison to the popularity of Peanuts, in the mid to late '60s into the early '70s. And Charles Schultz, when he was approached, said yeah. And the thing about it is, think about it. Watterson was getting licensing offers almost immediately. His strip went from being in like a few dozen papers to being in like 1,200 papers in a year. And so he was getting at the very early days, getting offers for licensing. Peanuts had been around for a while. Peanuts had been around, over 10 years before the public really started paying attention to it. And licensing deals and animation deals and TV specials and things like that began to be offered to Schultz. So Schultz was probably thinking, well, I've got all this time in, I've got all this material in, as long as I oversee everything, which he did. He oversaw everything. If you did greeting cards or sweatshirts with his characters on them, he oversaw them. and you couldn't use any artwork that wasn't his. And if you didn't use existing artwork, you would have to commission him to do new artwork specific to whatever it was you were doing. And it all had to be done by him, nobody else, no assistants, no one else. And got to respect that too. He maintained control, and you can't argue with his success. Did he make the right decision for himself and his family? I think he did. Did Wooderson make the right decision for himself and his, his ethical profile? Yeah, he did. They both made the right decisions. But Schultz, I don't know if any of you realize how enormously popular he was. There was a year where he had the number one TV show, obviously the number one comic strip, the number one bestseller, the number one Broadway show, all at the same time. And the money was pouring in. And up to his death, and probably a few years following his death, he was high in the top 10 of most highly paid entertainers in the world, often coming to the number 2 slot. And I believe one year he was the number 1 most highest paid entertainer in the world. And it was kind of cool to see a comic strip guy. I mean, a guy who just sat every day drawing comic strips, and he was drawing them. He didn't hand it over to assistants. It was too personal. Peanuts was too personal a work to ever be handled by anybody else other than himself. He didn't trust anyone else to do. He didn't have writers. He didn't have anyone assisting him. And here he was, this humble guy, scribbling away at a drawing board, and he's got more money than most of the people in the entertainment business. So I think they both made the right decisions for them. Key and Kurji. I hate the term serious or classic books as it gives snobs license to call writers like Robert E. Howard not serious. However, that being said, what are some of your favorite classic books? Well, I was real into mythology when I was a kid. And actually, most of the kids I knew were into mythology. Our library had a lot of great mythological books about the Norse gods and the Greek and Roman gods. And I remember picking up, they had 2 volumes, it wasn't this edition, but 2 volumes of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And they were called the Churchill editions. And they were kind of adumbrated. They were kind of simplified for children. I think of it now as Homer's elevator pitch, the Iliad and the Odyssey. But it was all there. And it was not, it was simplified to a degree, but it wasn't Baudelarized. They didn't take, the battle between Hector and Achilles in the Iliad is every bit as bloody in this children's version, or at least in my head it was. It's hard to it's hard to soften things like Achilles dragging Hector behind his chariot, his dead body. And the Scylla and the Charybdis were every bit as horrifying in the Odyssey as they were, probably in Homer's original version. Who's to say what Homer's original version was? Because it was never written down. Remember, Homer's epic poem was spoken. It was remembered verbally. And so this is simply, if he had to tell the story in a hurry, leave some parts out. But to say that the Iliad and the Odyssey sparked my imagination is an understatement. I read them and reread them and read them and reread them, and then I read different versions and ultimately read more complete, what were considered adult versions or the quote unquote classic versions of them. And, this sparked my imagination. To this day, I just love both of these stories. And there's so much here. And it's had so much of an impact on our culture, even an unconscious impact on our culture. I remember going to see the movie Troy, the Wolfgang Peterson movie Troy, and there would be all these little references within the movie, and the audience totally ignorant of the Iliad, never read it, didn't know anything about it before they sat down with their popcorn and their giant drink, and every once in a while in the audience you would hear, oh, when there was some reference made, like, oh, that's where that comes from. And the biggest one, of course, is when Brad Pitt gets shot in the heel with an arrow. So, and he's like, Achilles heel. Oh, oh. That was kind of cool. But yeah, these were big time occupying my mind and imagination when I was a kid. Now, as you go through school, you're assigned books, and I don't know about you, but when I'm told I have to read something, it's like, I don't want to read that. Why do I want to read that? I'm being forced to read something. I want to pick my own book. I read a lot. I don't need to be told what to read, but we were assigned Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I'm like, well, I guess. And I read it and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. This was in elementary school. And, introduced to the works of Mark Twain, which I, read a lot of Twain. I got a set of hardbacks from the 20s, complete Mark Twain library, and I'll pull one of them down every once in a while and read it or reread it. But good stuff, even though I was forced to read it. Now, another book I was forced to read I was a junior in high school, and we had this English teacher who was like 100 years old, and she didn't like any book written after 1932, and she assigned us My Antonia by Willa Cather. Now, I'm a junior in high school. I'm just a punk kid, and I'm like, a book by a woman, and it's about a woman, and it's like, what's it about? It's about a Russian immigrant girl growing up in, I forget, it was Nebraska or Wyoming, or, oh my God, that's a girl book. I don't want to read a girl book. And forced to read it. Oh my God, what a book. My Antonia is like if Cormac McCarthy wrote Little House on the Prairie. It's suspenseful and touching and heartbreaking and grim as hell. It's a unromanticized view of what it was like to be a homesteader and an immigrant in the United States. And just an amazing book. I read a bunch of other Willa Cather, and Willa Cather was like a literary darling for a long time. And obviously my English teacher in junior year thought she was the cat's pajamas. Literally, probably thought she was the cat's pajamas because she was, a kid in the 20s. But the and so Willa Cather was like, oh, she broke the glass ceiling by being a best-selling author, and she was a woman. And for a long time, there were, rumors that she was a lesbian, that she had a same-sex relationship with someone. And then you don't hear about Willa Cather anymore because it was revealed that no, she wasn't a lesbian. And not only that, she was a staunch conservative and very, very critical of the New Deal and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, she was a hardline, conservative, and so she fell out of favor. But if you read the book, you're like, yeah, she was a conservative. So it's no high-minded progressive would have written this book. Now, another one that I read in high school that's considered a classic that I picked myself was The Stranger by Albert Camus. And I don't know what made me pick it up. It wasn't this edition. Maybe it was the cover on the paperback or whatever. And I read it and it blew my mind. Not the story necessarily, but Camus' style of writing. He wrote in simple declarative sentences. There are no compound sentences. There's nothing. It's this simple pared down language. It's a perfect example of a good story plainly told. And even sparer than Ernest Hemingway. And he writes, and he doesn't, it's very influential on me, and I guess anyone who read it, because he doesn't really tell you anything about the character in the story. This guy, he kills someone and leaves their body on a beach. It all takes place in Algeria, and it basically goes on the run. He doesn't know if anybody's going to connect him to the crime, and the whole story is about that. And it would be a normal potboiler type crime story, except that Camus' approach to the material is so radical and revolutionary, and he just pares it down to the essence. And we learn everything about the main character from his actions, not from dialogue, not from inner thought, not from anything else. And the story just rips along. It's a page turner, but it's considered a classic despite being a page turner. um, Big influence on me, big influence on my writing, particularly in prose, which is like, don't pare it down to only what's necessary to move the story along. Don't get bogged down in the parts that readers skip, as Elmore Leonard might say. I don't know what's going on here. Somehow I missed the question. Here we go. Mattel Jones, regarding The Punisher, I've always wanted to see, and maybe just missed out on, a storyline where all the focus of the narrative is mostly on the criminal characters, and the Punisher is relegated to being almost Jason Voorhees type, relentless, unstoppable killing machine. I get that he is already relentless and unstoppable, but I mean, he's more like the killer in a splatter film. The bad guys are the summer camp kids. We don't really get any sense of Frank's personality beyond some grim humor related to his kills. Um, yeah, I like this. I like this, and I always kind of had this in mind. What if you did a Punisher story or a Dirty Harry story or a Death Wish type story told from the point of view of the criminals, and basically they're the victims of this relentless psychopath. I think the Ray Stevenson, the Punisher Warzone movie, kind of touched on a little bit of this. I always wanted to write a story like that, but I never really got around to it. I did it a couple times with Batman, where I wrote stories from the criminal's point of view. There's one story I wrote in which the criminals are so terrified of Batman, all of their actions lead to disaster because of their fear of Batman, because they think they saw Batman. They think that Batman is on a trail. And then it's revealed at the end of the story that in none of the cases in the story was Batman even there. That it was their fear of him and their imagining that he was there that was enough to spoil their plans and lead to disaster for them. And I did it with Batman. Never did it with the Punisher. I've done it a little bit with Levon Cade. I think there's some elements of that in Levon's Night, where these really, really badass, nasty, sadistic criminals, one by one, fall victim to Levon Cade, and in some cases it's told from their point of view. So I love that kind of story. I love the one of my favorite kind of stories is the "you don't know who you're messing with" story, and this kind of fits into that. So hey, one more thing. You folks responded, a couple of weeks ago. Someone basically asked me for movie suggestions. Apparently, I've seen more movies than most of you, and you want to pick my brain for movies that you may have missed or may have forgotten or may never have known about. And so we're going to do that again. We're going to move up through the 70s a little bit. I started out in the 70s last time, early 70s. So we're gonna move up to Robin and Marion. It's a Richard Lester movie, which teamed Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn, playing Robin Hood and Maid Marian. And it obviously shows them in middle age. The later part of the story, and largely follows the traditional accepted legend of Robin Hood to its conclusion. I won't spoil the movie for you, but there was an end to the story of Robin and Marian, and this one shows it. And you've got Connery, who's like at the top of his game. He's come off playing Bond. He's an international movie star. He's huge now. He's had success with Man Who Would Be King, Wind of the Lion, a number of other things, and he chooses to be in this Richard Lester directed film, which is kind of a swashbuckler, more of a romance story, more of a period drama than it is a period adventure film. But all that said, it's highly entertaining from beginning to end. And additionally, you've got Robert Shaw as the Sheriff of Nottingham. And, time has not, there's no bygones be bygones between the sheriff and Robin. And it's got some good stuff and some welcome dry humor. And as I said, I won't spoil the ending, but it's touching. It's cathartic. Okay, another one is From Noon Till 3. Once again, it's a Western with Charles Bronson but it's not the typical Charles Bronson westerns. And he made a string of westerns in this period, largely shot in Europe. This one's unusual in that he's playing a comedic figure. Yeah, he's a tough guy. He's an outlaw. He's a bank robber. But we get to see Bronson's lighter side, and he had a great comedic timing. He could be a really funny guy. Not funny Bob Hope, but he handled humor, his comedic timing, and the rest of it, and range of expressions, and all the rest of it really lent itself. And basically, he's playing a robber who's on the run, and he hides out with this widow, lonely widow living in a house all by herself on the prairie, played by Jill Ireland. At this point, Bronson had so much juice at the box office that he could insist that his wife be in every movie that he made. So you get to see a lot of Jill Ireland's movies, but usually she's just like an ornament or an appendage to the movie. Here, she's really an integral part of the film, and she was a good actress. And obviously they've got a chemistry. They've been married for quite a while, and obviously they're both having a great time being in this movie. But it's kind of different. It's kind of bittersweet. It's not an action western. It is more of a romance story, more of a period comedy. But there's a lot of great elements and a lot of commentary that was, topical for the time about the price of fame, and more aptly the price of infamy. And but it's a cool movie if you ever get a chance to take a look at it. Here's one probably none of you have ever heard of. It's Joseph Andrews. It's a Tony Richardson film, and Peter Firth plays the lead character. It's based on a Henry Fielding farce, a Henry Fielding novel, set obviously during the 1700s. And it's a coming of age story. Joseph Andrews, trying to find himself and ending up in the arms of Anne Margaret, playing a character called Lady Booby. Fielding's was anything but subtle, and it's a really fun story. It's fast paced. I think it runs under 90 minutes, and it's got everything. It's got everything a farce should have: mistaken identities, and fun stuff, hiding in closets and all the rest of it. In addition to that, it's got all of the period tropes I love about the 18th century. It has highwaymen. There's a sword fight in a castle that belongs to a guy who makes his money robbing graves. He's a titled lord who robs graves, and there's just a lot of cool stuff in it, and some real laughs and some terrific dry British humor. So it's worth looking up. I don't know where the hell you would find it, seriously. Now, another one, semi-tough. Maybe a lot of you have seen this. This one's pretty readily available. I think it's on Amazon Prime currently. It's a football comedy based on a novel. And it's a Burt Reynolds vehicle for the most part. Burt Reynolds and Chris Christopherson play NFL players from Texas, or in Texas. And their hijinks and all the rest of it. And it's got all the usual rough and tumble football humor, sports humor, and probably a few lines that I'll bet you if it's on a streaming service, there's a couple of lines this movie probably gets struck out. But at the heart of it, it's a comment on finding yourself, of trying to fill the empty void. And this is told through the vehicle of a love triangle. Joe Clayburgh is the daughter of the owner of their football team. And Burt Reynolds is really smitten with her, but she likes Chris Christopherson. And so Chris Christopherson and Joe Clayburgh are a couple. Burt Reynolds is like, I can't take my buddy's girl away, but boy, I really like her. And I wish she would change her mind and come over to me. And he does all kinds of things to improve himself, to make him, in her eyes, a more interesting, well-rounded person. Of course, it's all phony baloney. He's just pretending to do these things, or pretending to be interested in these self-improvement gimmicks to get her to pay attention to him, and enter into a relationship with him. but there's a lot of really funny scenes making fun of things like est and self improvement fads that were huge at the time, and it's really worth seeing. It's, you know, for me, it's a timeless classic comedy that has something on its mind. I think Michael Ritchie directed it, so you know, Michael Ritchie, you know, you're going to get an intelligent film, and a lot of fun if you've never seen it. You need, you know, this and North Dallas 40, I think, are the best. Well, Any Given Sunday, I'll throw that into, are the best movies ever made about football. So that's it for this week. I gave you some movies to watch, so you have some homework, and tried to warn you about the dangers of working for the big publishers. You know, watch your back, count your silverware. And so that's it for this week. Thank you for subscribing, liking, watching, listening. Tell your friends about it, and I'll see you all down the road.